Alright, before you even think about scrolling past this, let me ask you something real. You know BTS. You know the sold-out stadiums, the Billboard records, the UN speeches, the global domination. But do you actually know who these 7 guys were before the cameras, before the screaming fans, before the world knew their names? Because here's the thing nobody talks about. These weren't robots built in a K-pop factory. These were real teenagers, living real lives, in real neighborhoods, with real crushes, real heartbreaks, and yeah, real game. Some of them? Quiet, shy, couldn't even look a girl in the eye. But others? Oh, others were out there collecting hearts like Thanos collecting Infinity Stones, and they weren't even famous yet. So the question is, which member had girls literally lining up at his school gate? Which one got a love confession every single week and just casually said no? Which member was so smooth that even his own teachers noticed? And which one, the one you'd never expect, actually had the most chaotic romantic history of them all? This is not fanfiction. This is not a rumor thread. These are real stories, real interviews, real confessions straight from their own mouths. 7 members. 7 rankings. 1 ultimate player. Let's find out who was the biggest player in BTS before the fame even started. Starting from number 7, the one who had absolutely zero game. Number 7. Jimin, the golden boy who was too busy chasing perfection to chase girls. Look, if you came into this list thinking Park Jimin was out there breaking hearts left and right in Busan before BTS happened, I need you to sit down, take a deep breath, and completely erase that image from your head. Because the reality of pre-fame Jimin is so far from what you'd expect that it's almost comical. This is the same guy who now has millions of people worldwide literally fainting at his performances. The same guy whose every glance on stage feels like a love letter written in slow motion. But rewind the clock back to his teenage years in Busan, and you'll find a completely different human being. A kid so laser-focused on one thing and one thing only that the concept of playing the field wasn't even in his vocabulary. That one thing? Dance. Not girls. Not dating. Not sneaking love notes into someone's locker. Dance. Pure, obsessive, almost terrifyingly dedicated dance. Jimin attended Busan High School of Arts, and let's be clear about something. This wasn't some casual after-school hobby situation. He was enrolled in the modern dance department, and he wasn't just enrolled, he was the top student. Number 1. The kid that teachers pointed at and said, that's the standard. While other guys his age were figuring out how to talk to girls at lunch break, Jimin was in the practice room at 6 a.m., stretching, drilling routines, pushing his body to limits that most adults couldn't handle. His classmates from Busan Arts High have gone on record saying that Jimin was basically a ghost outside of the dance studio, not because he was antisocial, but because he literally did not exist anywhere else. The practice room was his universe. And here's the thing that makes this even more fascinating. Jimin has openly admitted in multiple interviews, including early BTS episodes and variety show appearances, that he was genuinely shy around girls. Not the fake kind of shy where a guy pretends to be humble, but secretly knows he's got game. No, we're talking about the real, painful, I don't know where to put my hands or where to look kind of shy. The members themselves have backed this up countless times. Suga once said that when Jimin first arrived at the BigHit dormitory after transferring to Korea Arts High School in Seoul, he was so polite and so reserved that the Hyungs genuinely worried about whether this kid could survive the idol industry. He would bow at almost a 90-degree angle to everyone. He barely spoke unless spoken to, and the idea of him being some kind of romantic smooth talker? Absolutely laughable to anyone who knew him at that time. Let's talk about the transfer itself for a second, because this is a detail most people skip over, and it actually tells you everything about Jimin's priorities. He left Busan. He left his family, his friends, his comfort zone, his entire life as a teenager to move to Seoul and train under BigHit Entertainment. That's not what a player does. A player stays where the audience is. A player stays where the social circle is warm and the options are plenty. Jimin did the exact opposite. He ripped himself out of everything familiar and threw himself into a trainee system that was brutal, exhausting, and completely unforgiving. He's talked about how those early trainee days were some of the hardest of his life. He would practice until 4 a.m., sleep for 2 hours, wake up, go to school, come back, and practice again. There was no time for dating. There was no energy for flirting. There was barely enough time to eat properly. And even if you remove the schedule from the equation and just look at Jimin's personality during that era, this was a kid who was battling serious self-doubt. He's been incredibly open about how he constantly felt like he wasn't good enough, like he didn't deserve to be in BTS, like he was the weak link. That kind of internal pressure doesn't leave room for romantic adventures. When you're spending every waking moment trying to prove to yourself that you belong, the last thing on your mind is trying to impress someone at a cafe or slide into someone's DMs. Not that DMs were even a big thing back then. There's also a story that has circulated among ARMY for years, and while the exact source varies, the essence has been confirmed through BTS content, where the members were asked about their dating experiences before debut. And Jimin's response was something along the lines of having zero meaningful romantic experience. Not a few dates here and there. Not one serious girlfriend. Zero. And he wasn't embarrassed about it either. He said it almost matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Of course he didn't date. When would he have? Between the 14-hour dance sessions and the crippling self-doubt and the pressure of being a trainee in a company that wasn't even guaranteed to debut him, the math simply didn't add up. And that's what makes Jimin's position at number 7 so perfectly fitting. It's not that he couldn't have been a player. Let's be honest, even as a teenager, Jimin had the face, the charm, the talent, and the kind of magnetic aura that naturally pulls people in. The potential was always there. The raw material for a heartbreaker was sitting right there in plain sight. But he never activated it. He never even tried. He was too busy being at war with himself, too busy trying to become the best dancer in the room, too busy earning his place in a group that would eventually change the world. Jimin didn't break hearts before fame. He broke his own body in the practice room, night after night, chasing a dream that hadn't happened yet. That's not a player. That's a soldier. And honestly, that makes his current stage presence even more insane when you think about it. The guy who couldn't talk to girls in Busan is now the same guy who makes entire stadiums lose their minds with a single lip bite. Character development doesn't even begin to describe it. But here's what's going to mess with your head if Jimin, with all his charm and talent, sits at the very bottom of this list with virtually zero game before fame. Then what does that tell you about the members ranked above him? If the guy at number 7 is this good-looking and still had no romantic history, how wild do you think number 6 is going to get? Let me just say this, number 6 had a little more confidence, a little more swagger, but the way it played out? Not exactly what you'd expect from someone in a world-famous boy band. Number 6. V. The country boy whose weird charm confused every girl in town. Now this one is going to surprise a lot of people, because if you look at Kim Taehyung right now, in the present day, with that face that literally got him voted the most handsome man on the planet multiple times, you would assume this guy came out of the womb breaking hearts. You'd assume he was the kid in school who had girls writing his name on their notebooks, doodling little hearts around Mrs. Kim Taehyung during math class. You'd assume that a face like that, a face that professional photographers, plastic surgeons, and Renaissance painters would all agree is mathematically close to perfection, would have given him an absolutely unfair advantage in the dating game before he ever stepped foot in a big hit practice room. And you know what? You'd be wrong. Not completely wrong, but wrong enough that his placement at number 6 is going to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about how attraction actually works in real life. Because here's the secret about pre-fame Taehyung that most people don't fully appreciate: this kid was weird. And I don't mean quirky in a cute way weird. I mean genuinely, authentically, unapologetically strange in a way that made people around him, including girls who might have otherwise been interested, tilt their heads and go, wait, what just happened? Let's start from the beginning, because the beginning is crucial. Taehyung did not grow up in some polished Seoul neighborhood where kids were trendy and social media savvy and already practicing their idol audition poses in the mirror. No. Kim Taehyung grew up in Jeocheong, a rural countryside town in South Gyeongsang province, where the main scenery was rice paddies, mountains, and the kind of silence that city kids would find unsettling. His family were farmers. Not wealthy. Not connected to the entertainment industry. Not anywhere close to the glamorous K-pop pipeline. He grew up helping his grandparents on the farm, running around in fields, and living a life so far removed from Seoul's trainee culture that it might as well have been a different country. And that upbringing shaped him in a very specific way. Taehyung didn't develop the kind of smooth, calculated social skills that you'd associate with a player. He developed something else entirely, a raw, unfiltered, almost alien way of interacting with the world that was simultaneously charming and baffling. His teachers have been referenced in various accounts as being unable to predict what he would say or do next. He was the kid who would answer a serious question in class with something so left field that the entire room would go silent for 3 seconds before bursting into laughter. That's not player energy. That's chaos energy. And chaos, while entertaining, is not exactly the recipe for smooth romantic conquest. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and where Taehyung edges slightly above Jimin on this list. Despite the weirdness, despite the countryside innocence, Taehyung was not completely clueless about romance. He has mentioned, across various BTS content over the years, from early Bangtan bombs to variety appearances, that he did have some concept of crushes and romantic feelings during his school days. There's the well-known detail that Taehyung played the saxophone, and if you know anything about the social dynamics of Korean schools, being the kid who plays an instrument, especially a cool instrument like the sax, automatically gives you a certain aura. It doesn't make you a player, but it makes you noticeable. It makes you that interesting kid. And Taehyung was definitely noticed. The problem, and this is the fundamental reason he's at number 6 and not higher, is that being noticed and actually doing something with that attention are two completely different skills. Taehyung had the raw materials. The face was there. The unique vibe was there. The saxophone mystique was there. But the follow-through? The calculated moves? The ability to read signals and act on them? That part was basically non-existent. He was the type of kid who could accidentally make a girl's heart flutter with one random comment and then immediately ruin it by doing something so bizarre that she'd question whether he was even aware she existed as a romantic possibility. There's something almost poetic about it when you think about it. The boy who would grow up to be considered one of the most attractive humans alive was, as a teenager, essentially fumbling through social interactions like a baby deer learning to walk on ice. And here's a detail that adds even more context. The way Taehyung even ended up at BigHit Entertainment tells you everything about his relationship with intention and planning. He didn't audition because he had a master plan to become an idol. He went to accompany a friend who was auditioning. He was literally there as emotional support, a +1, a sidekick, a cheerleader on the bench. And then, almost by accident, almost as if the universe grabbed him by the collar and said, "No, you're the one," a BigHit staff member noticed him and asked if he wanted to audition too. And he did. And he passed. And his friend didn't. The entire trajectory of his life, the trajectory that led to him becoming a global superstar, was an accident. An unplanned, unscripted, completely chaotic accident. And that's exactly how Taehyung operated in every area of his life before fame, including romance. Nothing was calculated. Nothing was strategic. He didn't pursue girls with a plan. He didn't have a playbook. He existed in this beautifully chaotic cloud of his own making, and sometimes that cloud would drift close to someone and create a moment of connection, and sometimes it would drift in the completely opposite direction and leave everyone confused. The members have described pre-debut Taehyung as someone who lived in his own world, a world that was vivid and colorful and endlessly fascinating, but also incredibly hard to navigate if you weren't him. Jungkook has mentioned being initially confused by Taehyung's personality when they first met. The Hyungs have talked about needing time to decode him. If his own bandmates, people who lived, ate, and practiced with him every single day, needed a manual to understand him, imagine being a random girl at Jeocheong trying to figure out whether the saxophone playing, random comment making, countryside weirdo was flirting with you or just being himself. The answer, almost every time, was that he was just being himself. There was no flirting. There was no game. There was just Taehyung, raw, unfiltered, beautiful, confusing Taehyung, bouncing through life like a pinball in a machine that only he could see. And that's why he sits at number 6. Not because he lacked attractiveness. God knows the attractiveness was overflowing. Not because he was invisible. He was far too unique to be invisible. But because being a player requires a level of intentional social maneuvering that was completely foreign to his operating system. He had the face of a heartbreaker, but the social GPS of someone who threw the map out the window and decided to just wander. Some girls in Jeochang probably had secret crushes on the tall, handsome, saxophone-playing kid with the deep voice and the strange sense of humor. But did Taehyung know? Probably not. Did he act on it? Almost certainly not. Did he care? He was too busy living inside his own imagination to even notice. But if you're sitting there thinking, okay, so number 7 was too focused and number 6 was too oblivious, surely the rest of the list gets more interesting. Oh, you have absolutely no idea what's coming. Because number 5? Number 5 actually had real, documented, undeniable moments of romantic energy before the fame hit. And the way it unfolded? It'll make you look at this member completely differently. Number 5. Jungkook. The kid who had every ingredient to be a player but got drafted too early. Okay, now we're getting into the part of this list where things start to get genuinely interesting, because Jungkook at number 5 is one of the most fascinating cases on this entire ranking, and the reason is not what you think. It's not because he had some secret girlfriend in Busan. It's not because he was out there collecting phone numbers at the school gate. The reason Jungkook sits right here in the middle of this list, above Jimin, above Taehyung, but below the members who really had game, is because of a single, brutal, undeniable fact that changed the entire trajectory of his adolescent life. He got pulled into the idol machine before his player arc even had a chance to begin. And that, more than anything else, is what makes his story so uniquely heartbreaking and fascinating at the same time. Let's rewind. Busan, 2011. Jungkook is 13 years old. 13. Let that sink in for a moment. While most kids his age are worrying about homework, arguing with their parents about bedtime, and maybe, developing their first awkward crush on the girl who sits 2 rows ahead in class, Jungkook walks onto the stage of Superstar K Season 3 and auditions with a performance that was raw, imperfect, but absolutely dripping with something that entertainment professionals can spot from a mile away, potential. He didn't win. He didn't even make it far in the competition. But what happened after that audition is the stuff of K-pop legend, and it's the moment that essentially stole Jungkook's normal teenage years right out from under him. 7 entertainment agencies, 7, came knocking after his Superstar K appearance. Not 1. Not 2. 7 different companies saw this baby-faced kid from Busan and said, we want him. JYP Entertainment wanted him. FNC wanted him. Starship wanted him. The biggest names in the industry were fighting over a kid who still probably had a bedtime. And out of all those options, Jungkook chose the one that made the least business sense on paper. He chose BigHit Entertainment, a small, struggling company that most people in the industry didn't even take seriously at the time. Why? Because of one person. Kim Namjoon. He saw RM at the audition venue, thought he was the coolest person alive, and made a decision that would shape the rest of his life based on pure gut feeling. That's not strategy. That's a 13-year-old being a 13-year-old. And that decision meant one thing: Jungkook packed his bags, left Busan, left his family, left his school, left his friends, and moved to Seoul to become a trainee. At 13. Now let's talk about what Jungkook was like in Busan before all of this happened, because this is where the player potential conversation gets real. Every single piece of evidence from his pre-trainee life points to one conclusion: this kid was an absolute natural. He was athletic, genuinely athletic, not the I play sports sometimes type, but the I'm good at literally every physical activity I try type. Soccer, boxing, running, you name it, Jungkook's body was built for movement and competition. He was good-looking in that effortless way that doesn't need styling or expensive clothes to work, the kind of face that hits different even in a basic school uniform. He could sing. He could dance without formal training. He had that quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're talented but not yet knowing how talented. In short, Jungkook in Busan was a walking cheat code. The kind of kid that girls would absolutely notice, the kind that would generate whispers in hallways, the kind that older students would keep an eye on because even at 12, 13 years old, you could tell this one was different. And here's what multiple sources, including his own members and various BTS content from the early days, have confirmed. Jungkook was popular in school. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't hiding in the corner. People knew who he was. Girls knew who he was. But, and this is the critical, but he was so young that the gap between being noticed and actually having game was still enormous. Think about it. At 12, 13 years old, what does game even look like? Passing a note? Making eye contact across the cafeteria? Having a friend ask a girl if she likes you? The sophistication level of romantic interaction at that age is basically zero, no matter how good-looking or talented you are. You can have the face of a Greek god, but if you're 13 and your voice is still cracking, the player handbook hasn't even been unlocked yet. And then, right at the exact moment when most boys start to figure out the basics of attraction, around 14, 15, 16, when they start getting taller, getting more confident, learning how to talk to girls without their voice shaking, Jungkook was gone. He was locked inside the BigHit training system, practicing 16 hours a day, living in a tiny dorm with 6 older guys, eating cheap meals, sleeping on the floor, and working toward a debut that wasn't even guaranteed. The trainee period essentially put Jungkook's entire romantic development on pause. Not just slowed it down, paused it. Full stop. The members have talked about this extensively, and the picture they paint of trainee-era Jungkook is almost heartbreakingly innocent. He was the baby of the group in every possible way. When he first arrived at the dorm, he was so shy that he wouldn't even shower unless he was sure no one else was in the bathroom. He would cry if the Hyungs teased him too hard. He communicated more through physical gestures, nods, head shakes, small smiles, than through actual words. Suga has talked about how Jungkook would just stand in the doorway of the practice room, not saying anything, just watching, like a small animal trying to determine if the environment was safe. Jin has described feeding him, literally putting food in front of him and making sure he ate, because the kid was too timid to ask for things. This is the guy you're trying to imagine as a player? This is the boy you're supposed to picture smooth-talking girls and leaving a trail of broken hearts? The image doesn't compute. It doesn't even come close. But, and here's why Jungkook is at number 5 and not at number 7, the potential was always screaming louder than anyone else's. See, the difference between Jungkook and the 2 members below him is that Jungkook's natural magnetism wasn't just hypothetical, it was visible, tangible, and acknowledged by people around him even when he was doing absolutely nothing to activate it. Jimin was too focused on dance to even register romantic possibilities. Taehyung was too lost in his own eccentric world to notice when someone was interested. But Jungkook? Jungkook was aware. He was shy, yes. He was young, absolutely. He didn't act on anything, that's confirmed. But there's a difference between being oblivious to attention and being too nervous to respond to it, and Jungkook fell squarely in the second category. He knew when people were looking. He knew when there was interest. He just didn't have the experience, the age, or the environment to do anything about it. There are moments scattered across early BTS content, subtle ones, the kind you catch on a rewatch, where you can see that Jungkook understood attraction on an instinctive level that went beyond his years. The way he would get flustered when a female MC complimented him, but then recover with a tiny smirk that said, "I know." The way he would compete fiercely in physical challenges partly because he understood, even subconsciously, that being the best in the room is attractive. The way he would watch his Hyungs interact with girls and quietly take notes, absorbing, learning, building a playbook he wasn't old enough to use yet. Jungkook at number 5 isn't here because of what he did, it's because of what he would have done if the universe had given him 2 or 3 more normal years in Busan. If he'd stayed in school until 17, 18, with that face, that body, that athletic ability, that quiet intensity, Busan wouldn't have stood a chance. He would have been the guy that every girl in the district had a story about. But the universe had different plans. It pulled him out of the normal timeline, dropped him into a trainee dungeon, and said, "Your player arc is cancelled. Here's a world domination arc instead." And honestly, looking at where he ended up, it's hard to argue with the trade. But now that we've covered the members who had potential but never really got to use it, we're about to cross into different territory entirely. Because number four didn't just have potential. Number 4 actually had moments. Real, documented, confirmed moments where the charm wasn't theoretical, it was operational. And the stories? They'll catch you completely off guard. Number 4, RM, the underground genius whose brain was his most dangerous weapon. Alright, listen carefully, because this is where the list takes a sharp turn, and I mean sharp. We're leaving behind the territory of shy boys and unused potential and stepping into the zone where things actually happened. Where charm wasn't just theoretical. Where the game wasn't locked in a drawer collecting dust. It was out in the open, breathing, moving, and occasionally making contact. And the member standing at the center of that shift? Kim Namjoon. RM. The leader. The brain. The kid from Ilsan who wasn't running around schoolyards trying to impress girls with athletic stunts or pretty faces, no. Namjoon was doing something far more dangerous. He was using his mind. And if you think raw intelligence isn't attractive, if you think being the smartest person in the room doesn't give you an almost unfair advantage in the game of attraction, then you have never watched someone with a 148 IQ lock eyes with you and say exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment. Because that is what made pre-fame Namjoon a completely different animal from the 3 members below him on this list. Let's go back to Ilsan. Goyang City. A satellite city northwest of Seoul, not the countryside, not the deep urban jungle, but somewhere in between. Close enough to Seoul's cultural pulse that a smart, curious kid could plug into it. Far enough away that he still had a suburban normalcy to his daily life. And Namjoon was, by every account, not a normal suburban kid. This was a boy who scored in the top 1.3% of the nation on standardized tests. A boy whose teachers fully expected him to go to one of Korea's elite universities, sky schools, the Ivy League equivalents, and pursue some respectable, high-income career in law or medicine or engineering. His parents certainly expected it. Korean society expected it. The entire machinery of academic pressure that defines so much of Korean adolescence was pointing at Namjoon and saying you are destined for a lecture hall, not a stage. But Namjoon had other plans. And those other plans are exactly what catapulted him into social environments that most Korean teenagers his age never got anywhere near. Because while other kids were attending hagwons, after-school cram academies, and memorizing textbook passages until midnight, Kim Namjoon was sneaking into the Korean underground hip-hop scene. Let that image settle in your head for a moment. A 16-year-old kid from the suburbs, walking into underground rap venues in Seoul, surrounded by older rappers, producers, hustlers, artists, people who lived outside the mainstream, who spoke in raw lyrics and unfiltered truth, who operated in a social ecosystem that was light years away from the sanitized world of Korean high school. And Namjoon wasn't there as a spectator. He was performing. Under the name Runch Randa, he was writing verses, spitting bars, building a reputation in a scene that did not care about your age, your school grades, or your parents' expectations. The only currency that mattered was talent and authenticity, and Namjoon had both in terrifying abundance. Now, here's why this matters for the player conversation, because the underground scene didn't just develop Namjoon's musical skills. It developed his social operating system in ways that normal high school never could have. Think about what navigating that world requires. You have to read people. You have to hold your own in conversations with individuals who are older, more experienced, and more street smart than you. You have to project confidence even when you're nervous. You have to know when to speak, when to listen, when to push, and when to pull back. These are, whether anyone admits it or not, the exact same skills that make someone effective in romantic situations. And Namjoon was sharpening these skills every single week, in real time, in high-pressure environments, long before BTS was even a concept. Multiple accounts from people who knew Namjoon during his underground days describe him as someone who carried himself with a maturity that didn't match his age. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the guy who walked into a room and demanded attention through volume or physical dominance. He was the guy who sat in the corner, observed everything, and then when he finally spoke, every person in the room turned to listen. That's a specific kind of charisma, a quiet, intellectual magnetism that is devastatingly effective on people who value depth over surface. And let's be real, in the underground scene, there were women. This wasn't a boys-only club. There were female rappers, female fans, female artists, female producers, people who inhabited this space and interacted with everyone in it, including a teenage Namjoon who was rapidly becoming one of the scene's most talked about young talents. He wasn't sealed in a trainee dungeon with zero contact with the opposite sex. He was out in the world, in a world that rewarded exactly the kind of energy he naturally radiated, thoughtful, articulate, deep, and disarmingly honest. Namjoon has been more open than most BTS members about the fact that he experienced genuine romantic feelings and situations during his pre-debut years. His lyrics, even the early ones, the ones he wrote before BTS debuted, carry a weight of emotional experience that goes beyond imagination. You can hear it in the specificity of his words, the way he describes moments of connection and disconnection, the way he captures the feeling of wanting someone you can't quite reach. That's not abstract poetry. That's lived experience translated into art. And his self-taught English adds another layer to this picture. Namjoon famously learned English by watching the sitcom Friends, watching it obsessively, pausing scenes, repeating dialogue, absorbing not just the language, but the cultural dynamics of Western romantic interaction. Friends is, at its core, a show about relationships, about flirting, about miscommunication, about the messy, funny, painful process of figuring out love. Namjoon didn't just learn vocabulary from that show. He absorbed an entire framework for understanding how attraction works, how conversations between men and women flow, how humor can be used to build connection. He was, in essence, studying a masterclass in social dynamics while simultaneously leveling up his English, and he was doing it voluntarily, driven by pure curiosity. That combination, underground social experience, intellectual depth, emotional awareness, linguistic versatility, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you're the smartest person in most rooms, made Namjoon genuinely effective in romantic contexts in a way that Jimin, Taehyung, and Jungkook simply weren't at that stage of their lives. He could talk to girls. Not at them. Not around them. To them. He could hold a conversation that went deeper than surface-level compliments. He could make someone feel intellectually stimulated and emotionally seen at the same time, which is, and any psychologist will confirm this, one of the most potent forms of attraction that exists. But, and this is the reason he's at number 4 and not higher, Namjoon's greatest strength was also his greatest limitation. The same brain that made him so articulate and perceptive also made him an overthinker of the highest order. This is a guy who has publicly admitted to analyzing situations to the point of paralysis. A guy who would think about what to say for so long that the moment would pass. A guy who could write the most beautiful, emotionally devastating verse about a girl he liked, but then freeze up when she was actually standing in front of him. The gap between Namjoon the lyricist and Namjoon the real-time romantic operator was real, and it was significant. He had the software, the emotional intelligence, the vocabulary, the depth, but the hardware sometimes lagged. He'd compose the perfect sentence in his head and then trip over his own feet walking toward her. He'd craft an incredible analogy about how her eyes reminded him of something he read in a Murakami novel and then realize, mid-sentence, that maybe comparing someone's eyes to a passage from Norwegian would isn't the most universally charming move at a casual hangout. That's the beautiful tragedy of pre-fame Namjoon. He was too smart for his own game sometimes. Too deep. Too cerebral. Too caught up in the architecture of conversation to let it flow naturally. The players ranked above him on this list didn't overthink. They operated on instinct, on feel, on a kind of social fluidity that doesn't require a 148 IQ and, in fact, might even be hindered by one. Namjoon at number 4 is the chess player in a game that sometimes rewards checkers. He saw 12 moves ahead, understood the emotional dynamics at play better than anyone, and could write about love in ways that would make grown adults cry, but when it came to actually playing the field, he was often standing at the edge of it, thinking too beautifully to jump in. And yet, he still ranks above 3 of his members, because even with all that overthinking, his moments of connection were real. They happened. They left marks. They inform his art to this day. But if Namjoon, with all his intellectual firepower and underground experience, only lands at number 4, then I need you to genuinely prepare yourself for what's coming. Because number 3 didn't operate from the brain. Number 3 operated from something far more instinctive, far more natural, and the stories from before debut will make your jaw physically drop. Number 3, Jin. The face so dangerous that agencies literally chased him down the street. Now we've arrived at the part of this list where we stop talking about potential and start talking about impact. Because Kim Seokjin, the eldest, the so-called visual of BTS, the man who gave himself the title Worldwide Handsome and somehow made the entire planet agree with him, did not need a strategy. He did not need underground connections, intellectual depth, or years of social training. He did not need to read the room, calculate his approach, or craft the perfect sentence. Kim Seokjin had something that overrode every single one of those skills combined, a face so unreasonably, almost offensively beautiful that the world literally could not leave him alone. And I'm not being dramatic. I'm being factual. Because what happened to Jin before he ever set foot in a big hit practice room is the kind of story that sounds like it was pulled from a Korean drama script, except it actually happened, in broad daylight on a public street, to a guy who wasn't even trying. Let's set the scene. Seoul. A regular day. A young Kim Seokjin, university student at Konkuk University, studying film and acting, minding his own business, probably thinking about his next class or what he was going to eat for lunch, is walking. Just walking. Not performing. Not posing. Not doing anything remotely designed to attract attention. He's just a college kid in regular clothes, moving from point A to point B, existing in the most mundane way a human being can exist. And then a car slows down. Someone from SM Entertainment, the biggest entertainment company in South Korea at the time, the company behind EXO, Super Junior, Girls' Generation, TVXQ, the absolute titans of K-pop, spots him from inside the vehicle. And what they see makes them literally stop the car and get out. They approach this random college student on the sidewalk and ask him if he's ever considered becoming an idol. Not an actor. Not a model. An idol. Based on nothing except the way his face looked while he was walking to school. Let that sink in. SM Entertainment, a company that receives hundreds of thousands of audition applications every year, a company that can afford to be the pickiest organization in the entertainment world, saw Jin's face in passing traffic and decided they needed to talk to him immediately. That's not normal attraction. That's not, oh, he's cute. That's a multi-billion-won corporation recognizing a once-in-a-generation visual asset in real time. And here's the thing, Jin reportedly thought it was a scam. He didn't go. He looked at this offer from the biggest entertainment company in Korea and essentially said, yeah, no, that sounds fake, and kept walking. The audacity. The absolutely unhinged level of confidence, or maybe innocence, required to brush off SM Entertainment like they were handing out flyers for a bad restaurant. And then it happened again. BigHit Entertainment scouted him in a similar fashion. Another company. Another moment of someone seeing Jin's face and being physically unable to let him just walk by without saying something. This time, he actually followed through, and the rest is history. But the story of how he got scouted isn't just a fun anecdote, it's a window into what Jin's entire pre-fame life must have been like. Because if entertainment professionals, people who are literally paid to evaluate attractiveness, who spend their entire careers surrounded by good-looking trainees and idols, were stopping their cars in traffic to recruit him, imagine what regular people were doing. Imagine what girls his age were experiencing when Kim Seokjin walked into a classroom, sat down at a university cafeteria, or showed up at a social gathering. The effect must have been nuclear. And unlike the members ranked below him, Jin actually had the time and the environment to let that effect play out. This is a crucial detail that separates Jin's pre-fame story from Jimin's, Taehyung's, Jungkook's, and even Namjoon's. Jin wasn't scooped up as a young teenager and thrown into a trainee dungeon. He lived a relatively normal life all the way through high school and into university. He had years of regular social interaction during the exact period when romantic dynamics are at their most active. High school, college, the golden era of dating, socializing, figuring out who you are and who you're attracted to. Jin experienced all of that as a free civilian, not as a locked-down trainee. And he experienced it with that face. Do you understand what that combination produces? A good-looking kid trapped in a trainee system has potential but no opportunity. A normal-looking kid with full social freedom has opportunity but limited impact. Jin had both maximum visual firepower and maximum social freedom for a longer period than any other BTS member. That's the equation that puts him at number 3. His classmates from Konkuk University and even from his earlier school years have contributed to a picture of Jin that is almost comically consistent. He was the guy everyone noticed. Not just girls. Everyone. He walked into spaces and the energy shifted. People would do double takes. Conversations would pause. It wasn't something he manufactured or worked at, it was just the passive radiation of a face that was objectively, measurably, almost scientifically perfect in its proportions. And Jin knew it. This is another critical distinction between him and the members below. Jimin was too focused to notice attention. Taehyung was too lost in his own world. Jungkook was too young and shy. Namjoon was too deep in his own head. But Jin? Jin was fully aware of what his face did to people, and unlike the shy members who would have crumbled under that awareness, Jin leaned into it with a kind of easy, comfortable, almost playful confidence that made him even more attractive. He wasn't arrogant about it, that's important to note. Even his self-given title, Worldwide Handsome, has always been delivered with a wink, a joke, a layer of self-aware humor that transforms what could be obnoxious vanity into irresistible charm. And that humor, that ability to be devastatingly good-looking and funny about it, is a combination that very few humans on Earth can pull off, and Jin was doing it naturally, instinctively, long before BTS made him famous. He's spoken in various BTS content about his pre-debut life with a casualness that suggests comfort and experience. Not the wide-eyed innocence of Jungkook recalling a youth he barely got to live. Not the philosophical reflection of Namjoon analyzing his past through literary metaphors. Jin talks about his pre-fame days like a guy who lived. Who went to university parties. Who knew how social dynamics worked. Who understood that being handsome opens doors and being funny keeps them open. There's a smoothness to pre-fame Jin that feels practiced, not in a fake way, but in the way that a person who has received positive social feedback for their entire life develops a natural ease in human interaction. He never had to work for attention. Attention came to him like gravity, constant, unavoidable, requiring zero effort. And when attention comes to you that easily, for that long, you inevitably develop a comfort with it that translates directly into romantic confidence. Jin didn't chase. He didn't need to. His entire pre-fame existence was a series of moments where opportunities presented themselves simply because he showed up with that face and that charm and that ridiculously well-timed sense of humor. He was the passive player, the guy who didn't hunt but whose trap was always set, always baited, always catching something without him even checking it. Is that playing the field in the traditional sense? Maybe not. But the result, the volume of romantic attention, the ease of social connection, the effortless confidence in interactions with the opposite sex, puts him firmly above 4 of his members and solidly in the top 3. But here's what should genuinely unsettle you as we move forward. If Jin, with a face that literally stopped traffic and a social freedom that most idols never get, is only at number 3, then the 2 members above him didn't just receive attention passively. They went out and created it. They had stories. They had history. And number 2? Number 2 had a reputation that was so well established before fame that even the members couldn't deny it when the cameras were rolling. You're not ready for this one. Number 2, Suga, The cold Taegu's shadow who made hearts bleed without even looking up. If you've been following this list closely, and I mean really paying attention to the pattern, then you've noticed something. The members at the bottom were too focused, too young, or too lost in their own worlds to play the field. The members in the middle had the tools, but lacked either the environment or the execution. Jin at number 3 had passive magnetism that pulled people in without effort. But number 2? Number 2 is where we enter a completely different dimension of pre-fame romantic energy, because Min Youngi didn't pull people in passively. He didn't charm them with humor. He didn't dazzle them with looks. He didn't outthink them with intellect. Min Youngi did something far more devastating than any of that. He made people fall for him by acting like he genuinely, completely, authentically did not care whether they existed or not. And if you have ever, in your entire life, encountered someone whose complete emotional unavailability made you want them 10 times more than any sweet-talking, flower-giving, door-opening romantic ever could, then you already understand exactly why Suga sits at number 2 on this list, and why the stories from his pre-fame life in Daegu read less like a K-pop origin story and more like the backstory of a character from a gritty indie film that wins awards at Sundance. Let's go to Daegu. Because you cannot understand pre-fame Youngi without understanding Daegu, and you cannot understand Daegu without understanding what that city does to the people who grow up in it. Daegu is not Seoul. It's not the polished, trend-obsessed, image-conscious capital where everyone is trying to look a certain way and talk a certain way and fit into a certain mold. Daegu is raw. Daegu is blunt. People from Daegu speak directly, hit hard, and don't waste time on pleasantries that they don't mean. The Daegu Sadori, the regional dialect, is harsher, deeper, more aggressive than standard Korean. It sounds like someone who's slightly annoyed at all times, even when they're being affectionate. And Min Youngi absorbed every ounce of that energy into his DNA. He was Daegu distilled into a human being, sharp-tongued, emotionally guarded, allergic to performative warmth, and absolutely magnetic because of it. Now, before we even get to the romantic stuff, you need to understand what Youngi was doing with his time in Daegu, because it sets the stage for everything that follows. By the time he was in his mid-teens, Min Youngi was already deep in the Daegu underground rap scene. Not as a spectator. Not as a curious kid dipping his toes in. He was a producer. He was a rapper performing under the name Gloss. He was working part-time at a recording studio, learning the technical side of music production, spending hours, sometimes entire nights, in front of a cheap computer with cracked software, making beats that sounded like they came from someone who had lived 3 lifetimes worth of pain. And he was doing all of this while his family was struggling financially, while his parents were telling him to give up music and get a real job, while the entire structure of Korean societal expectation was bearing down on him like a hydraulic press trying to crush his dreams into dust. Youngi's pre-fame life wasn't glamorous. It was hard. It was lonely. It was defined by sacrifice, stubbornness, and a refusal to bend that bordered on self-destruction. He injured his shoulder in a delivery accident while working a part-time job to fund his music, and he didn't even tell anyone about it for months, because stopping work meant stopping income, and stopping income meant stopping music. That's not a player's backstory. That's a survivor's backstory. And survivors, people who have been through real hardship, who carry real scars, who have stared at the possibility of failure and said, I don't care, I'm doing this anyway, have an aura that is fundamentally different from people who grew up comfortable. It's an aura of depth, of weight, of I have seen things you haven't seen, and I'm not going to explain them to you. And that aura, in the context of attraction, is absolute dynamite. Here's the thing about the underground scene in Daegu, it was a community. A tight, close-knit ecosystem of musicians, producers, rappers, fans, and hangers-on who all knew each other, hung out at the same spots, went to the same shows, and existed in a social bubble that operated by completely different rules than mainstream Korean society. In this world, the currency wasn't looks or money or academic achievement. The currency was authenticity, skill, realness. And Youngi had all 3 in quantities that made him stand out even among people who prided themselves on being outside the mainstream. He was the kid who walked into a cypher and outperformed rappers 5 years older than him. He was the producer whose beats other artists wanted to use. He was the quiet one in the corner who didn't say much, but when he got on the mic, the entire room went silent, not because he was loud, but because every word he said carried the weight of someone who meant it down to his bones. And in that environment, surrounded by people who valued raw, unfiltered authenticity above everything else, Youngi's emotional unavailability wasn't a flaw. It was a feature. It was the most attractive thing about him. Because everyone in that scene could spot a fake from across the room, and Youngi was the most aggressively, almost painfully real person any of them had ever encountered. He didn't perform emotions he didn't feel. He didn't smile when he wasn't happy. He didn't pretend to be interested in things or people that didn't genuinely move him. And when someone like that, someone whose approval feels impossible to earn, whose attention feels like a gift because it's so rarely given, whose emotional walls are so high that you can't even see the top, when someone like that looks at you, really looks at you, and for one moment lets the guard down just enough to let you see something real behind those dark, tired, impossibly intense eyes. That's not just attraction. That's addiction. And the stories from Youngi's pre-fame life confirm exactly what you'd expect from someone with that kind of energy. He wasn't out there chasing anyone. He wasn't collecting phone numbers or sending flirty texts or trying to impress girls with grand gestures. He was doing the opposite, living his life with a single-minded focus on music and survival, broadcasting a signal of total emotional independence that paradoxically made people orbit around him. His lyrics, even the earliest ones, the Daegu underground tracks, the pre-debut material that hardcore fans have dug up and analyzed frame by frame, contain references to romantic experiences that are too specific, too visceral, too emotionally textured to be fictional. When Youngi writes about heartbreak, it doesn't sound like someone imagining what heartbreak feels like. It sounds like someone remembering. When he writes about late-night conversations, about the gap between what you feel and what you say, about wanting someone you know isn't good for you, there's a lived quality to those words that no amount of literary skill can fake. He felt those things. He lived those moments. They happened in Daegu studios at 3 a.m., in conversations that weren't recorded, in connections that burned bright and fast in the underground darkness. The members themselves have hinted at Youngi's pre-fame romantic history in ways that are subtle but unmistakable. In early BTS content, when the topic of dating experience comes up, watch Youngi's reaction. He doesn't blush like Jimin. He doesn't deflect like Taehyung. He doesn't get flustered like Jungkook. He smirks. A tiny, barely perceptible smirk that says, "I know things I'm not going to share." And the other members notice that smirk. They react to it. They tease him about it. There's an unspoken acknowledgement within the group that Youngi arrived at Big Hit with more lived romantic experience than most of them, and that experience wasn't theoretical, it was battle-tested. Hoseok has jokingly referenced Youngi's Daegu days with the kind of tone that implies there are stories that the cameras will never capture. Namjoon, the only other member with significant underground experience, has a certain knowing look when the topic comes up around Youngi, the look of someone who understands because he inhabited a similar world, but who also recognizes that Youngi went deeper into it. And here's what truly earns Youngi the number 2 spot. It's not just that he had experience. Namjoon had experience too. Jin had opportunities. But Youngi had something neither of them possessed, an emotional frequency that created obsession. Not just interest. Not just attraction. Obsession. Number 1, J-Hope, the Gwangju son who burned through every heart in his orbit. And here we are. The final spot. The throne. The absolute peak of this entire ranking, and if you thought this was going to be a close call, if you thought the gap between number 2 and number 1 was going to be narrow and debatable and open to interpretation, then let me correct that assumption right now. Because young Hoseok, J-Hope, Hobie, the eternal sunshine of BTS, the guy whose smile could power an entire city grid, didn't just edge past the other 6 members on this list. He lapped them. He ran circles around them. He operated on a completely different frequency of pre-fame romantic energy that none of the others, not the shy ones, not the oblivious ones, not the intellectual ones, not the passively handsome ones, not even the magnetically cold ones, could touch. And the reason is so beautifully simple that it's almost frustrating. Young Hoseok was the only member who had the complete package: the looks, the talent, the confidence, the social intelligence, the environment, the time, and the willingness to actually use all of it. Every other member on this list was missing at least one critical ingredient. Jimin had the looks, but not the freedom. Taehyung had the face, but not the social awareness. Jungkook had the potential, but not the years. Namjoon had the brain, but overthought everything. Jin had the visuals, but played it passive. Suga had the mystique, but kept the world at arm's length. J-Hope? J-Hope had everything, and he held nothing back. Zero filter. Zero hesitation. Zero walls. He was a fully operational, maximum output, all systems go charmer from the moment he learned how to dance, and in Gwangju, that moment came very, very early. Let's talk about Gwangju, because just like Daegu shaped Suga and Ilsan shaped Namjoon, Gwangju is absolutely essential to understanding why Hoseok became what he became. Gwangju is a city with a soul. It's known throughout Korea as the heartland of art, culture, passion, and emotional expression. The people of Gwangju are warm in a way that's different from Seoul's polished friendliness. It's a raw, genuine, almost overwhelming warmth that grabs you by the shoulders and refuses to let go. Gwangju people laugh louder, love harder, fight fiercer, and feel deeper. It's in the water. It's in the air. It's in the DNA of every person who grows up within that city's borders. And young Hoseok didn't just absorb Gwangju's energy, he became its living embodiment. He was Gwangju compressed into a single human frame and set loose on the world with a megawatt smile and a pair of dancing feet that refused to stay still. Before BigHit, before BTS, before any of the global madness, Hoseok was already a star. Not a K-pop star. Not an internet star. A street star. He was a member of a street dance crew called Neuron, and within the Gwangju underground dance community, the name Young Hoseok was not whispered, it was shouted. This kid was winning competitions. Not participating. Not doing well. Winning. Regional dance battles. Crew showcases. Events where the best dancers in the city, and sometimes from neighboring cities, came together to prove who was the hardest, the cleanest, the most explosive on the floor. And Hoseok was consistently, repeatedly, almost boringly dominant. He was the kid that other dancers watched from the side of the stage with a mixture of admiration and frustration because they knew, deep down, that competing against him was an exercise in coming second. Now, and this is where the player conversation ignites, you need to understand what the street dance scene is as a social environment. This isn't a solo activity performed in a locked room. This isn't sitting in front of a computer making beats alone at 3 a.m. like Suga. This isn't studying English from a TV screen like Namjoon. Street dance is inherently, fundamentally, inescapably social. It happens in public spaces. It happens in crews. It happens at events surrounded by crowds of people, people who are watching, cheering, judging, and yes, being attracted to the performers. Dance battles are spectacles. They are performances of physical mastery, creative expression, and raw charisma delivered directly to an audience that is standing close enough to feel the energy radiating off the dancers' bodies. And when you are the best dancer in that space, when you are the one hitting moves that make the crowd lose their minds, when you are the one whose body moves in ways that seem to defy physics, when you are the one standing in the center of the circle with every eye in the room locked on you, the romantic attention isn't just possible. It's inevitable. Hoseok wasn't dancing in a vacuum. He was dancing in front of people. Real people. People who saw him move and felt something shift inside their chests. People who watched this kid from Gwangju pop, lock, glide, and freestyle with such effortless precision that it looked less like a learned skill and more like a supernatural gift. And after the battles, after the showcases, after the competitions, there were the social gatherings. The hangouts. The after parties. The crew dinners. The late-night conversations in parking lots and convenience stores. The street dance community is tight-knit and social in a way that naturally creates romantic opportunities, and Hoseok was at the center of that community. Not on the edges. Not lurking in the background. Dead center. He was the hub around which social energy orbited. And here's what separates Hoseok from every other member on this list in the most critical way. His personality wasn't just compatible with social interaction. His personality was built for it. Where Suga's default setting was withdrawal, Hoseok's default setting was engagement. Where Namjoon's instinct was to analyze, Hoseok's instinct was to connect. Where Jin waited for attention to come to him, Hoseok went out and generated it from scratch. He was the guy who walked into a room and within 5 minutes knew everyone's name. He was the guy who made the quiet person in the corner feel included. He was the guy whose laughter was so loud, so genuine, so infectious that people gravitated toward him not because of how he looked, though he looked damn good, but because of how he made them feel. And how you make someone feel is the single most important variable in the attraction equation. You can be the most handsome person alive, but if you make people feel nervous or inferior or invisible, your looks become a wall, not a door. Hoseok's energy was the opposite of a wall. It was an open gate with a welcome sign and a party behind it. So there it is. The complete breakdown. 7 members. 7 stories. 7 completely different relationships with romance, attraction, and the game before the name BTS meant anything to anyone outside a small Big Hit practice room in Seoul. And now that we've walked through every single ranking from the bottom to the very top, let's take a step back and look at the full picture, because the full picture tells a story that's bigger than any individual member. But here's the real takeaway, the one that matters more than any ranking, more than any number 1 or number 7 designation. None of these guys became who they are because of their pre-fame romantic histories. They became who they are because of what they did with the parts of themselves that had nothing to do with romance. Jimin's obsessive discipline became the foundation of BTS's performance standard. Taehyung's eccentricity became the group's creative wildcard. Jungkook's stolen youth became fuel for the most explosive artistic growth any idol has ever experienced. Namjoon's overthinking became the philosophical backbone of BTS's message. Jin's effortless confidence became the emotional anchor the group needed. Suga's pain became the raw material for music that made millions of people feel less alone. And Hoseok's sunshine became the energy that held 7 very different human beings together through years of hardship, doubt, and pressure that would have destroyed lesser teams. The question was, which BTS member was the biggest player before fame? And the answer, technically, is J-Hope. But the real answer, the deeper answer, is that every single one of these 7 guys was playing a much bigger game than romance. They were playing for their dreams, for their futures, for each other. And they won. Not because they were players, but because they were willing to sacrifice everything, including normal teenage lives, normal relationships, and normal romantic experiences for something they believed in more than any crush, any heartbreak, or any late-night conversation could ever offer. And that is why the world fell in love with them, not because they played the game, but because they changed it forever.